The wind carried dust across the main street of Red Creek, a sun-baked settlement crouched between the edge of the desert and the beginning of Apache land. The hour before dusk always looked the same there. Orange light spilling over clapboard buildings, shadows stretching long as sins. People spoke in low voices, never too loud, as though the desert might hear. Inside the small house behind the sheriff's office, Clara Weston pressed her palms together and tried not to tremble. Her father's voice came through the thin wall like a hammer striking iron. "It's decided," Sheriff Weston said. "She's old enough and it'll end the bloodshed." There was silence and then the deeper tone of another man, the military commander from Fort Powell. "You're sure the chief will accept her?" He asked for peace. "This is peace," her father replied. "He gets my daughter and we get quiet borders. I don't see another way." Clara's heart slammed once against her ribs. She had heard of trades before, horses for rifles, cattle for land, but never a daughter for peace. She wanted to step into that room and scream that she was not a coin to be spent, yet her knees went weak before she could move. The door opened suddenly and Sheriff Weston looked at her, tall, broad-shouldered, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "You'll do as I say, Clara." His voice carried no room for argument. "You'll save this town from war. That's more than most women ever get to do." "Save them?" she whispered. "By giving me away." He did not answer. He put on his hat and walked out, leaving the smell of dust and tobacco behind. Clara stood motionless until her breath came back in painful gasps. Then she ran to her small room, threw herself onto the bed and pressed her face into the pillow until her sobs were swallowed by the fabric. The wedding was set for a week later. Red Creek prepared for it the way it might prepare for a storm, nervous and curious, unwilling to believe it was real. On the morning of the ceremony, women gathered at the window of the schoolhouse to watch. The bride, they said, would marry a man who lived beyond fences, who spoke a language of wind and fire. Some pitied her. Others said it was justice, that her father's arrogance had finally caught up with him. Clara stood before a cracked mirror. Her mother's dress, yellowed from years in a trunk, fit her awkwardly. The lace at the sleeves scratched her arms. Her reflection showed a pale face framed by chestnut hair and eyes that refused to shine. A knock came at the door. It was Pastor Green, hat in hand, beard trimmed neat. He looked at her gently. "Child, don't," she said, voice shaking. "Don't say it's God's will." He closed his mouth. "Then I'll say only this, wherever you go, he goes with you." She wanted to believe him. But as the church bell rang, she felt abandoned by heaven itself. The ceremony took place on the dusty ground outside the courthouse. The entire town came to watch, shopkeepers, ranchers, soldiers. Children sat on fences. Behind them, a small group of Apaches waited silently, their faces painted, eyes unreadable. At their center stood Nantan, the man she was to marry. He was tall, shoulders straight beneath a deerskin shirt fringed with beads. His black hair, thick and glossy, was tied back with leather. An eagle feather rose from it like a flame. His eyes, dark, steady, met hers without cruelty. He looked more solemn than proud, like someone accepting a burden he hadn't asked for. Her father stood between them, face carved from stone. "This union," he said to the crowd, "will bring an end to bloodshed between our people. My daughter offers herself for peace." Clara felt the words like a chain tightening around her throat. She wanted to speak, to shout that she had not offered anything. But when Nantan stepped forward and extended his hand, she felt every gaze on her and could not move. His palm was warm, rough, steady. "I take this woman," he said in slow English, his accent soft but clear. "Not for war, not for shame, but for peace." She looked up at him, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something behind his solemnity. Compassion, perhaps, or regret. The air trembled with silence. The ceremony ended without applause. The townspeople drifted away, muttering. Some spat on the ground. One woman crossed herself. Sheriff Weston handed her a small satchel and turned away before she could speak. She climbed onto Nantan's horse behind him. The animal shifted, and before she could take one last look at the only world she had ever known, they were riding east, into the desert. The first day was endless. The land unfolded in waves of red earth and whispering grass. The heat pressed against her skin until it burned. She did not speak, and neither did he. By nightfall, when the sky turned violet and the coyotes began their song, they reached a cluster of lodges set in the crook of two cliffs. It was his village, Tsokos, the hidden stones. Children stared. Women paused in their work. The smell of smoke and roasting meat filled the air. Clara kept her head down. She felt their eyes like arrows on her back. Nantan dismounted and offered his hand again. "You will stay here," he said. "This lodge is yours." She nodded, throat dry. He turned and spoke in Apache to a woman who approached, tall, graceful, eyes bright with curiosity. She smiled at Clara, touching her arm lightly. "I am Lohani," she said in careful English. "My brother's sister." Clara whispered, Your brother's sister?" Then realized she meant his sister. Lohani laughed softly, and the sound, gentle and real, made something loosen inside Clara's chest. That night, alone in the small lodge, she listened to the strange rhythm of drums echoing through the canyon. Outside, people danced. Inside, she sat with her knees drawn up, staring at the fire until tears blurred the flames. When the flap rustled, she jumped. Nantan stood there holding a clay bowl. "Eat," he said. She hesitated. "I'm not hungry." He studied her for a moment, then placed the bowl beside her. "You must live." His tone was even, not commanding, simply a truth laid before her. He turned and left. When he was gone, she lifted the bowl. The stew was thick, fragrant with herbs she did not know. She ate slowly, and for the first time since she left Red Creek, she did not feel hollow. Days slipped into weeks. The sun rose, burned, and fell behind the red cliffs. Lohani taught her how to grind maize, how to weave grasses into rope, how to read the stories painted on hides. Clara learned words. Ashki for boy, Dadil for fire, she for me. She noticed Nantan working alone for hours, carving something from bone and silver, then stitching leather late into the night. When she asked Lohani what he was making, the woman smiled. "You will see," she said. He did not sleep beside her. He rarely spoke, but he never treated her as property. When she stumbled, he caught her arm. When she burned her hand on the fire, he brought aloe leaves to soothe it. She began to see that his silence was not cruelty. It was patience. Back in Red Creek, people whispered. The sheriff drank more than usual. The townsfolk boasted that their peace had come cheap, but some wondered how long it would last. "Mark my words," said the blacksmith. "The Apaches will come down from those cliffs one night and take what's left of us." Yet no raids came. No arrows, no burning barns, only quiet. And then, one full moon night in the Apache camp, Nantan called the people together. Drums faded as he stepped into the firelight. Clara, startled, saw that he carried something wrapped in deerskin. He motioned for her to stand beside him. Her heart pounded as she walked to him, the faces of the tribe glowing around her in the circle of light. He unwrapped the bundle slowly. Inside lay a necklace. Silver and turquoise worked into intricate shapes, gold threads woven through. At its center hung an eagle feather crossed over a small silver cross. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nantan lifted it high. "This is for her," he said. "She came from another world, but she walks among us with courage. This," he touched the necklace, "is both our blood and hers." He placed it around her neck. The cool metal pressed against her skin. Tears rose before she could stop them. Lohani translated softly, "He made it himself, from gold taken back from white raiders who killed our kin. He gives it so both peoples remember peace is not weak." Clara met Nantan's eyes. "Why me?" she whispered. His answer came in Apache first, then in English. "Because you did not run." The fire cracked. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, a coyote howled. And in that sound, she felt the weight of something vast shift inside her, fear melting into something steadier, like trust. She touched the necklace, and though she did not know what tomorrow would bring, for the first time since leaving Red Creek, she did not feel like a prisoner. She felt chosen. The gift, she would soon learn, would echo far beyond that night. But for now, under the starlit desert sky, it was enough. The morning after the wedding, Red Creek stirred slowly, as if it were waking from a long, uneasy dream. Dust clung to every surface. The sun hit the wooden storefronts with a harsh glare, and the townspeople whispered behind lace curtains and saloon doors. Some swore they had seen Clara's new husband, the Apache chief. Nantan ride past the town boundary in silence, yet upright and composed, his horse stepping like a shadow across the flat. Sun-baked earth, the sheriff, proud and self-satisfied, walked into the saloon with a swagger meant to calm fears, but the murmurs did not stop. "He's tall enough to scare a horse into quitting," one rancher muttered. "And quiet enough to make a preacher blush," said the bartender, polishing glasses nervously. But the whispers were not only about fear. They carried confusion, amazement, and a prick of unease, as though the townspeople were beginning to sense something they had not expected. A few days after the wedding, word reached the town that Clara had returned, not alone, but accompanied by a group of Apaches riding in formation behind Nantan. The image stopped people in their tracks. Men who had once scoffed now exchanged uneasy glances. Children clutched at their mothers' skirts. The chief dismounted outside the church. Dust fell from his hair and shoulders, glinting against the late morning sun. Clara, standing beside him, wore the necklace he had given her, silver and turquoise catching the light like a promise. It was delicate, yet it radiated authority, and the way she held her chin high despite the tightness in her chest struck the town silent. No one spoke at first. Horses stamped impatiently. The wind whipped papers from shop counters. The air felt charged, as though electricity were crawling across the dry boards of the street. Then the sheriff stepped forward, chest puffed, face flushed with pride and a hint of anxiety. "My daughter," he said, "has returned, unharmed." Some men laughed nervously. Some wives whispered to each other wide-eyed. But when Clara smiled faintly, not a mocking, fearful smile, but a measured one, the laughter died. Her eyes were no longer those of a frightened girl. They were steady, alert, and calm. Nantan spoke, his voice even and deliberate. "We come in peace," he said in English, the words slow and deliberate. Then, switching to Apache, he addressed the group behind him. "Show them what we carry." From behind him, the Apaches began to display baskets of corn, leatherwork, and gifts of turquoise and gold. Their skill was unmatched. Horses gleamed with clean tack. Arrows were sheathed in hand-tooled quivers. Every item they presented was a subtle statement: strength, culture, and order. The townspeople's jaws dropped. The blacksmith, who prided himself on the superiority of his tools, could not hide his astonishment. Even the preacher, Pastor Green, muttered under his breath, "By God, craftsmanship like that." Children peered through slats of fences, unable to take their eyes off Clara, who accepted the gifts with a quiet nod. It was not arrogance nor submission. It was a dignity that made the onlookers feel suddenly awkward about their prior judgments. Later that day, Clara walked through town with Lohani at her side. Townsfolk stepped aside, unsure whether to greet or avoid them. Clara's heart ached at the familiar streets, at the people who had raised her, who had once called her their daughter or neighbor, now staring with suspicion. Yet she felt a strange strength rising inside her. She was no longer merely a pawn. She had learned something in the Apache village. Courage was not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. When they entered the general store, a group of men gathered at the entrance, whispering. "She looks different," one muttered. "No," another said, voice lower. "She carries herself differently." "That necklace." "It's not just jewelry." Clara nodded politely at the shopkeeper, selecting a few necessities while Lohani explained quietly that the village had instructed them to provide goods to help Clara settle comfortably. The townsfolk noticed the ease with which she moved, the soft authority in her gestures. She handled every question, every glance with calm precision. The afternoon grew long, and Nantan arrived in town alone. Not for a parade, not to flaunt power, but to deliver a message. The crowd parted instinctively, as though the air itself respected his presence. He walked to the center of town, removed his hat, and looked directly at the sheriff. "Your daughter is safe," he said in deliberate English, "and she is respected." The words struck the men like a whip. Some felt relief. Others felt a strange sting in their pride. For years they had assumed that an Apache would impose terror or submission. But here was a man of discipline, generosity and skill, showing no threat, only assurance. The following morning, news spread that Clara and Nantan had personally repaired fences that had been damaged in recent storms, tending to the livestock that had strayed toward Apache lands. Word traveled fast. The people of Red Creek, who had expected war, were now witnesses to a strange alliance. "By God," said the blacksmith, shaking his head, "those Apaches are different than I thought." The sheriff, standing on the porch of his office, could not help but feel conflicted. Pride for his daughter's safety warred with the discomfort of seeing the people he once controlled now silent in awe. Red Creek had been waiting for a victory, a show of power, but what they got instead was something they didn't know how to respond to: respect. At the saloon, men who had once mocked the idea of an alliance with the Apaches sat quietly, glasses untouched. Outside, children whispered excitedly about the brave bride and the gentle chief, passing stories from fence to fence. The whispers grew into murmurs, and the murmurs grew into legend. By evening, the town square looked empty yet charged, as though holding its breath. Nantan returned with Clara, leading the horse with careful hands. The necklace caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming like fire against her chest. The onlookers could not stop staring. "I never thought I'd see it," one rancher whispered. "I thought she'd be lost out there. But look at her now. Look at them both." Even the children, normally restless, sat still on fence posts, eyes wide. Clara did not speak, but her expression told the entire story. Dignity, courage, and the beginning of a bridge between two worlds that once stood apart in fear and suspicion. That night, a town meeting was called at the courthouse. Men and women filed in slowly, unsure whether to celebrate or confront the events that had unfolded. Nantan and Clara arrived, quiet but present. The chief's calm authority silenced the room before a single word could be spoken. "This town and my people can live together," Nantan said. "Not through fear, but through respect. The girl you sent to us is now a part of both our worlds, and she has chosen life, not war." Silence followed. Some townsfolk shifted uneasily. A few cleared their throats. But no one interrupted. No one challenged him. His words, simple yet firm, carried the weight of truth. Clara stepped forward. She did not speak loudly. She did not boast. She only said, "We are stronger when we see each other as people, not enemies." The room, once filled with suspicion, now trembled with awe. Even the sheriff felt a twinge of shame for underestimating both the man and the girl he had sent away. By the time the meeting adjourned, Red Creek had changed. Conversations in hushed tones became discussions of collaboration. Rumors of raids ceased. Children ran freely to the outskirts, no longer fearing the red cliffs beyond the town. The silence of respect had replaced the noise of suspicion. Days turned into weeks. Clara worked with the Apaches and the townsfolk to build stronger fences, trade goods, and teach the children of both communities. Nantan remained quiet yet present, a steadfast figure whose reputation grew with every interaction. The necklace he had given her became a symbol, not just for Clara, but for the entire town. It reminded them that courage, respect, and understanding could achieve what violence never could. Red Creek could not stop talking about it, yet no words could diminish the impact. The girl who had been forced into marriage had returned not only alive but empowered, and the man who had married her had done so with honor and skill that left the town silent, awestruck, and changed forever. Even the children began to tell stories of her bravery, of the chief's calm strength, and of the night the town learned that sometimes the greatest power lay not in fear but in peace. And so, Red Creek became a town that could not believe what it had seen, not because it was unbelievable, but because it had shattered every assumption they had ever held. The desert dawn crept slowly over Red Creek, brushing the town with pale gold light. Clara Weston stirred in her bedroll inside the Apache village lodge, the turquoise and silver necklace heavy against her chest. Though the weight was physical, the real gravity came from what it symbolized: choice, courage, and the beginning of something new. Nantan had been quiet all night, sitting outside near the fire with his eyes on the horizon. The rhythmic crackle of flames mixed with the distant hoot of an owl. Clara, curious yet hesitant, approached. "You never sleep in the lodge with me," she said softly. He turned, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "I do not need to," he said. "The night is safer outside. The fire is enough. You rest here." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning inside her since the day she left Red Creek. "Why did you give me the necklace?" He looked down at it, brushing a fingertip over the turquoise. "It is not a gift of possession," he said slowly. "It is a gift of understanding. It says you belong to yourself, and also to the bridge between our peoples. You carry both worlds, and both worlds can learn from that." Clara's chest tightened. She had never heard anyone speak with such precision, such power. Not her father, not the sheriff, not any of the men in Red Creek. Here was a man who wielded words like tools, careful, deliberate, capable of shaping lives. Later that morning, the sun fully climbed above the cliffs and Clara and Nantan rode into Red Creek together. The townsfolk noticed immediately. This was not the timid girl they had seen leave. This was a woman of poise and purpose, riding beside a chief whose presence demanded attention without threatening. Every step they took across the town square carried significance. The necklace gleamed, silver flashing in the sunlight, turquoise catching every eye. Even the soldiers from Fort Powell stopped their patrols to watch. Clara's heart raced as whispers rippled through the crowd. She's different. Look at him. He walks with dignity, not like a raider. The girl, she's not afraid. The mayor, a man who had been skeptical of any dealings with the Apaches, stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. Chief Nantan, he said, voice steady but low. We welcome your presence. Nantan inclined his head once, silently acknowledging the town's tentative respect. He did not boast. He did not flaunt power. Yet everyone felt it. The quiet certainty that came from skill, honor, and wisdom. The real turning point came when he presented the necklace formally to the townspeople. Clara followed him to the center of the square. The crowd parted instinctively and a hush fell over Red Creek, deeper than any fear or awe they had felt before. This is for her, Nantan said, lifting the necklace so that sunlight reflected off its intricate gold and silver. It is a token of peace, respect, and strength. It carries the history of our people and the hope of yours. He carefully placed the necklace around Clara's neck again, this time in front of everyone. Gasps ran through the crowd. Women whispered in astonishment. Children craned their necks to see. Even the most hardened men. The ranchers who had scoffed at the marriage. The soldiers who had feared Apache raids stood frozen. The design was flawless, turquoise stones representing the earth, silver threads symbolizing the water and sky, and gold threads intertwining like the paths of the two cultures now bound together. At its center, a single eagle feather crossed a tiny silver cross, an emblem of unity and understanding. Clara's fingers touched the pendant instinctively. She felt the pulse of meaning behind it. It was more than decoration. It was a statement, and the town understood instantly. This necklace was a bridge, not a gift, and its presence spoke louder than words. The crowd's reaction was electric. Some people shook their heads, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Others murmured in awe. The blacksmith, who prided himself on skill unmatched, muttered to no one in particular. I've never seen craftsmanship like this in my life. A few men whispered about the risks of trusting Apaches, about broken promises and old grudges. But when they looked at Clara and Nantan, standing side by side, the tension in their shoulders slackened. Here was a display of power without threat, authority without violence. Even the sheriff, who had orchestrated the arrangement, felt a strange humility. He had thought he was giving his daughter away, yet now he saw the reality. She had grown into someone stronger than any fear or expectation. Over the next few days, Clara used the necklace as a symbol to show the town that trust could be earned. She walked among the settlers, explaining how the Apache tribe cultivated the land, hunted respectfully, and treated their elders with reverence. She taught them about their traditions, their codes of honor, and their skills in medicine and craft. Meanwhile, Nantan's quiet presence reinforced every lesson. He never dominated conversations, never demanded obedience, but his very demeanor spoke volumes. Men who had been ready to scoff now watched and listened, learning humility and respect. At the trading post, Clara demonstrated how to trade fairly for leather and pottery. Children followed her, asking questions about the tribe and its customs. The adults could not help but notice how their fear slowly melted into curiosity and admiration. It was the necklace, though, that became the center of attention. Whenever someone doubted the possibility of peace, they looked at it and remembered, strength does not always roar. Sometimes it glimmers quietly around a young woman's neck. One evening, Nantan invited Clara to the edge of the desert cliffs. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. He held a bow in his hands, carved and polished to perfection. Not a weapon, but a symbol of skill and care. This is the last of the gifts I made for you, he said, eyes meeting hers. It is not gold or silver. It is understanding. Every part of it is meant to remind you of what you can teach your people and mine. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. The fear she had carried for weeks, months, even years dissolved like morning mist. She realized now that this marriage, forced or not, had given her agency. She was no longer a pawn. She was a bridge. She was a teacher, a diplomat, a woman who could navigate two worlds. They stood in silence, watching the sun disappear. The necklace sparkled, catching the final rays. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath. Red Creek, the Apaches, the desert, the sky. They all seemed to pause and acknowledge the quiet power of the gift that had changed everything. When they returned to the town the next day, the transformation was visible. The townsfolk greeted Clara with cautious respect. Even those who had been most skeptical now asked her questions, listened to her explanations, and began trading with the Apaches. Nantan rode silently behind her, observing but never interfering. The children wore small replicas of the turquoise and silver designs he had given Clara, eager to emulate her bravery and wisdom. Adults who had once whispered about fear now whispered of admiration. By the end of the week, the sheriff himself admitted quietly to the blacksmith, "I was wrong. I thought I was giving her away. I see now. She was given a gift, and so were we all." Indeed, the wedding gift, the necklace, the message, the symbolic act of peace, had done more than adorn a young woman. It had shifted the entire town's perception, proving that honor, skill, and intention can silence suspicion far more effectively than threats or weapons ever could. Clara touched the necklace, feeling its cool weight. She realized that it was not just a gift from her husband. It was a gift for everyone, the Apaches, Red Creek, and herself, and it had changed everything. The dawn over Red Creek arrived like a slow whisper. Dust swirled in golden beams of sunlight, carrying the scent of sagebrush and smoke from distant cooking fires. In the center of town, Clara Weston adjusted the turquoise and silver necklace around her neck, feeling the weight not as a burden but as a promise, a symbol of the bridge she now carried between two worlds. Behind her, Nantan stood tall, calm, and silent, his eyes scanning the horizon as though reading the land itself. The townspeople had grown used to seeing him, quiet, respectful, deliberate, but today, he carried something new, a plan that would leave Red Creek speechless and forever changed. The tension had been building for weeks. While Clara had been learning the ways of her new people, trading goods and teaching children, whispers had persisted. Rumors of renewed Apache raids, stories of revenge, and warnings of violence had fanned fear in Red Creek. Many settlers had locked doors, barred windows, and kept rifles within arm's reach, expecting the worst. But Nantan's plan was not one of war, it was of show, demonstration, and undeniable proof of honor. It began before sunrise. Clara awoke to find him preparing bundles of carefully crafted items, baskets of corn, woven blankets, intricately carved bows and arrows, and leather goods polished to perfection. Every item bore subtle inscriptions, Apache symbols of peace, unity, and strength, combined with designs that Red Creek settlers would recognize as familiar motifs of their own heritage. "Why do we need these?" Clara asked, brushing her fingers over the carvings. "Because words alone do not persuade," Nantan replied. His voice was measured low. "Some lessons must be shown." Clara nodded, suddenly understanding. He did not need to fight them with force. He needed to demonstrate respect, skill, and collaboration, and in doing so, silence the town's doubts once and for all. By mid-morning, Red Creek streets were already buzzing with curiosity. Nantan led Clara and a small group of Apache men into town. The settlers, initially wary, froze as the group arrived. Horses were calm, the riders composed, yet there was an unmistakable air of command without threat. Clara felt the eyes of the townspeople on her, filled with suspicion, awe, and curiosity. She clutched her necklace, knowing this was the moment everything would change. "This is your gift," Nantan whispered as he passed a basket of corn to her. "Show them what our people can do," and she did. Clara moved gracefully among the settlers, offering baskets, laying blankets on the ground, and demonstrating the careful craftsmanship of Apache goods. Children gasped at the intricacy of carvings. Mothers admired the weaving, and fathers, once skeptical, even hostile, examined tools and leatherwork with quiet astonishment. Every gesture, every object was a statement. The Apaches were not savages. They were skilled, disciplined, and honorable. Nantan's next move was even more dramatic. He instructed his men to demonstrate hunting techniques and horse handling, right in the middle of the town square. The Apache riders moved with silent precision, guiding their horses through intricate maneuvers while displaying archery skills that left the settlers speechless. Arrows struck targets with perfect accuracy, never harming any livestock or person. Horses performed turns and stops that seemed impossible, responding to subtle commands that the settlers could barely see. The demonstration was elegant, deadly if necessary, but carefully controlled. It sent a single, undeniable message. These were people of discipline and honor, not mindless savages. The townsfolk could not speak. The blacksmith's jaw hung slack. The sheriff, standing on the courthouse steps, felt a humbling pride mixed with unease. He had thought he was giving his daughter away to satisfy a bargain, but the Apache chief had shown him something far greater: integrity that demanded respect, not fear. By midday, the Apaches presented the centerpiece of Nantan's plan, a public gift of peace. The chief carefully brought forth the turquoise and silver necklace he had given Clara, placing it ceremoniously in the center of the town square, atop a polished wooden plank. Around it he arranged the baskets, blankets, bows, and tools he had brought. "This is not for one person," Nantan declared, his voice carrying over the silent crowd. "It is for all of you, for understanding, for honor, and for the bridge we now share." Clara stepped forward. Her voice was calm, confident, and clear. "This necklace is a symbol of choice. We can live in fear, or we can live with respect. Today, we choose respect." The silence that followed was almost unbearable in its weight. Every man, woman, and child could feel it. The lesson was simple. Power can be shown through skill and dignity, not through intimidation or violence. Even the children understood it instinctively. They gathered around the gifts, pointing and whispering in awe. Mothers smiled and nodded, realizing that what had once seemed foreign and threatening was now something to admire. The adults, however, were slower to adapt, their fear fighting against their respect. But when Nantan demonstrated how the necklace had been crafted, each turquoise stone polished, each silver thread woven, each gold filament meticulously twisted, the townspeople's skepticism dissolved. This was artistry, discipline, and thoughtfulness all combined into a single object. It was a wedding gift, yes, but it was more than that. It was a manifesto of peace, skill, and intelligence. The blacksmith, a man who had spent decades honing metalwork, could only murmur, "I've never seen such perfection. Not in gold, not in silver, not in leather. It's flawless." Even the most stubborn skeptics could not deny it. By late afternoon, Red Creek had transformed. The townsfolk, once suspicious and fearful, were now awed and contemplative. They approached Clara and Nantan with questions, requests for demonstrations, and offers to trade. The shift was remarkable. Fear had been replaced by respect, tension by curiosity. The sheriff, who had orchestrated the original marriage as a political move, now found himself humbled. He had thought his daughter would be a passive participant, but she had become a teacher, a diplomat, and a bridge between cultures. Nantan had engineered the situation flawlessly. No violence, no coercion, just demonstration skill, and the undeniable statement of the wedding gift. As night fell, the town gathered around the flickering lanterns of the square. Clara and Nantan stood at the center, the necklace glowing faintly in the soft light. The Apache men and women formed a semicircle around them, silent but proud. "This is what peace looks like," Clara said softly, lifting her hand over the gift. "It is not absence of power. It is the use of power wisely, with skill and with respect." Even the toughest men nodded, realizing that the day had forever altered their understanding. What they had assumed would be submission or fear had turned into collaboration and admiration. The wedding gift, so carefully chosen, so artfully created, had silenced the town, not with violence but with proof. The town of Red Creek, once bristling with suspicion and prejudice, had learned a lesson that would linger for generations. Respect and understanding could achieve what guns and anger never could. Nantan remained quiet, as always, but his eyes carried a faint, satisfied gleam. He had not needed to fight, yet he had won the greatest victory possible, changing minds, hearts, and a town's perspective, all through discipline, skill, and honor. Clara touched her necklace and felt a surge of pride. She had been forced into marriage, yes, but in the process she had become a force of transformation, a living symbol of courage, understanding, and peace, and the town had witnessed it, silenced and awestruck, forever altered by the Apache's plan. The desert wind whispered around them as the moon rose, carrying with it the echoes of a day that would be remembered in Red Creek for decades. The day a young bride, her Apache husband, and a carefully crafted wedding gift silenced an entire town and built a bridge between worlds. The sun rose slowly over Red Creek, painting the wooden storefronts in warm gold and setting the red desert cliffs ablaze in the distance. The air smelled of dust and sage, but it also carried a new scent, a sense of possibility, of reconciliation. The town had been forever altered by events that no one could have imagined. A wedding, a gift, and the quiet brilliance of an Apache chief who knew exactly how to teach respect. Clara Weston stepped outside her temporary lodgings, her turquoise and silver necklace resting lightly against her chest. She had worn it every day since Nantan had given it to her, and it had become more than jewelry. It was a statement: strength through understanding, unity through courage. People had begun to look at her differently, not as a frightened girl who had been forced into marriage, but as a bridge between cultures, a teacher, and a leader in her own right. The first visitors came cautiously, almost timidly. Ranchers brought questions about hunting and grazing. Mothers asked about Apache medicine and herbs, and children, fearless in their curiosity, followed Clara through the town square, eager to learn about the people who had once been shrouded in fear and mystery. "How do you make the basket so strong?" one boy asked, peering at the tightly woven fibers. "Care and patience," Clara replied, smiling, "and understanding the land you live on." Adults watched silently, absorbing the lesson. What had once been a town fueled by suspicion and old grudges was beginning to see the Apache people, and by extension, their daughter's husband, not as threats, but as partners and teachers. Nantan remained a quiet presence throughout, riding slowly through the streets when he accompanied Clara, always calm, always deliberate. The townspeople had learned that he did not need to assert dominance with words or weapons. His every action spoke of skill, honor, and control. At midday, he demonstrated horse care and archery in the town square. He moved gracefully, precise, a living example of discipline and respect. Arrows struck targets with perfect accuracy, and horses responded instantly to subtle commands. The crowd watched in awe, the initial fear replaced by admiration. The blacksmith shook his head, muttering, "I've been working with metal and leather my whole life. I've never seen work like that. Not in Red Creek, not anywhere." Even the sheriff, who had once thought he was sacrificing his daughter for a political bargain, found himself humbled. The man who had feared giving her away now saw her standing proudly beside Nantan, holding herself with confidence, grace, and wisdom. In the following days, Clara organized collaborative projects that would forever tie Red Creek to the Apache people. She taught women and children weaving, pottery, and herbal medicine. She helped men repair fences and build stronger enclosures for livestock, blending the techniques of settlers with the skills of the tribe. The town became a hub of cooperation. Where once distrust had ruled, now mutual respect guided the daily routines. Every day Clara wore the necklace given by Nantan, and every day it reminded everyone of the lesson it carried. Peace and understanding could accomplish more than force or fear ever could. One afternoon, a group of children approached Clara and Nantan with a problem. A small herd of goats had wandered too close to Apache land, and the children were afraid of venturing too far. Clara knelt, speaking softly. "Do you remember what we learned? Watch carefully, move calmly, and understand the land. The goats will listen if we listen first." With guidance from Clara and silent signals from Nantan, the children led the goats safely back to the pasture. The adults watched in amazement. The lesson was clear. Respect and intelligence could tame situations that brute force could not. "I never thought I'd see this," said one rancher, eyes wide. "The girl, the chief, they've taught our children something we never could." Indeed, the town had begun to learn lessons that would last for generations. As the weeks turned to months, Red Creek settled into a rhythm of collaboration and understanding. Trade between the town and the Apache village flourished. Skills were exchanged. Knowledge was shared. Stories of bravery, honor, and ingenuity replaced the old tales of fear and raids. Clara became a figure of reverence and guidance, often sought for advice by both settlers and Apaches. Nantan, always present but never overbearing, reinforced every lesson with quiet authority. Their partnership became a living symbol of what could be achieved when two cultures met with respect rather than suspicion. The turquoise and silver necklace became a town legend, a reminder of the day a wedding gift had transformed lives. It was no longer just a personal token. It had become a bridge, a promise, and an emblem of unity. Even the skeptics began to change. The blacksmith collaborated with Apache artisans, combining techniques and tools and leatherwork that amazed both communities. Soldiers stationed at the fort observed the cooperation and realized that peace, nurtured carefully, could replace the constant vigilance they had once thought necessary. At the town square, Clara and Nantan often walked together, quietly observing the harmony they had helped build. Children ran freely, learning from both cultures, their laughter filling the air that had once been tense with fear. Mothers exchanged recipes and remedies. Fathers taught Apache men about new farming methods. Every day brought a small miracle, a subtle shift in perception. The sheriff, sitting on his porch one evening, admitted quietly to a neighbor, "I thought I was doing the right thing by forcing her into this marriage, but it turns out we were all given a gift instead." Clara and Nantan. They've changed this town more than I ever could have. The final proof of the town's transformation came during a festival organized to celebrate the alliance. Apache drums and songs blended with the settlers' music. Children performed dances they had learned from both cultures. Food, crafts, and stories were shared freely. Clara, adorned with the necklace, stood beside Nantan at the center of the celebration. The townsfolk watched them, no longer with fear or judgment, but with admiration and respect. "They have shown us something we never expected," whispered an elder. "Strength is not in fear or weapons. It is in honor, skill, and understanding." Indeed, the wedding gift had silenced the town, not with awe of power, but with proof of integrity, intelligence, and peace. The girl who had been forced into marriage had become a symbol of unity. The Apache chief had become a teacher and leader recognized across both worlds. By the time the sun set, Red Creek was no longer the same town. Fear had been replaced by collaboration, suspicion by respect, and isolation by connection. The necklace glimmered in the fading light, a reminder that one act of understanding could ripple across generations, changing hearts, minds, and a town forever. Clara touched it, smiling faintly. She realized that she had been given not just a gift from Nantan, but a gift for the entire community, the lesson that courage and respect could overcome even the deepest divides. And in the quiet desert night, as stars blinked into view, Red Creek finally understood. Some gifts do not belong to one person alone. They belong to all who are willing to see, to learn, and to change. The town, silenced once by fear, had now been silenced by respect, unity, and the wisdom of a thoughtful wedding gift.